And today I'll be discussing our work on peer reviews of peer reviews. So in this work, we aim to understand whether it is possible to reliably evaluate the quality of peer reviews. And specifically, we ask the question, what biases and errors arise in evaluating the quality of peer reviews? There are two primary motivations for eliciting evaluations of review quality. First, a number of past works and current peer review venues propose incentive mechanisms for the peer review process to motivate better reviewing. For example, reviewers may earn credit towards future peer reviews of their own work when they complete high-quality peer review of other works, or they may be penalized for poor quality peer review through desk rejects of their own submitted papers to a venue. These incentive mechanisms tend to rely on some measure of review quality elicited from other participants in the peer review process, like authors or editors. Second, in numerous studies, including some at Peer Review Congress today, people examine policy changes in scientific peer review, and they measure the efficacy of these changes based on evaluating the quality of reviews. So this includes changes to high-level policies like the use of double-blind review, and also technological interventions like the use of large language models to generate reviews. In our research, we delve into the validity of using these elicited quality scores by examining their reliability as indicators of review quality. So we asked participants at a large conference in machine learning and AI called NeurIPS to evaluate the quality of reviews given on their papers. I should say that in our community, we review entire papers at conferences. NeurIPS is one of the most prestigious conferences. Many of the landmark papers in our field have been published at NeurIPS. For example, the T in GPT stands for Transformer Architecture. That was a paper that was published at NeurIPS in 2017. In our experiment run at NeurIPS 2022, we recruited 4 types of evaluators to evaluate the quality of peer reviews. First, we recruited meta reviewers. You could think of these as akin to editors at a journal. We also asked paper reviewers who participated in the conference to evaluate other reviewers' reviews on a paper they reviewed. We asked paper authors to evaluate reviews on their own papers. And we recruited a pool of what I'll call external reviewers who were reviewers at the conference to review reviews on other papers that they hadn't handled as part of the conference. In total, we recruited 7,740 evaluators who completed over 9,870 paper reviews, with a total of 24,000 evaluations completed at this conference. So in this plot, I'll show you the distribution of evaluation scores. We asked evaluators to score overall quality of paper reviews on a 7-point Likert scale, with a higher score indicating higher quality review. And you can see that for all groups, the distribution of scores is roughly symmetric around the median score. We also asked the evaluators to evaluate on 4 sub-criteria whether the review showed understanding of paper, whether it covered important elements of a review, whether the reviewers substantiated their claims with evidence, and whether they gave constructive comments. We asked evaluators to evaluate these on a 5-point Likert scale ranging from -2 to 2. And these were all more skewed positive. So now the first question that we wanted to understand in our experiments was whether evaluators were biased by the length of reviews. Of course, longer reviews may reflect higher quality. So we ran a randomized control trial that controlled for quality and only manipulated the length of reviews, which I will now describe. We selected 10 paper reviews from the conference. These reviews followed the template shown. First, for each review, we generated a uselessly elongated version of the review by adding filler text. And we did this purely with copy-paste, no fancy AI tools. First, we copied the instructions for each question into the response. We additionally replicated paper abstracts. And we also replicated the drop-down options from this template into the review text of the response. So in doing this, original reviews were around 200 to 300 words, while the elongated reviews were 650 to 800 words. So we roughly doubled the length of reviews without actually adding any new content that didn't appear already. We then recruited 458 evaluators who had not previously seen these paper reviews at the conference, and we randomly assigned half of the evaluators to score the original reviews and the other half to score uselessly elongated reviews. We found a clear statistically significant bias towards the longer reviews, which we call uselessly elongated review bias. In particular, there was a 64% chance that evaluators rated a long review as higher quality than a short review. This corresponds to reviewers giving a boost of 0.56 points to the longer reviews on average on our 7-point review scale. And interestingly, the statistically significant bias also manifested in the concrete sub-criteria questions that we asked about understanding, coverage, substantiation, and constructiveness of reviews, which suggests that just asking more concrete questions about review quality didn't actually mitigate this uselessly elongated review bias. A second question we asked was on the reliability of evaluating review quality was whether paper authors are biased towards positive reviews on their own papers. We frequently see, at least in the computer science community, people going on Twitter and complaining, we got a bad review on our paper and it was really dumb. So first I'll show you a plot of the quality scores given to reviews split by the score that the review gave to the paper. So on the x-axis here, we have the score given by a reviewer to the paper, where 10 corresponds to a recommendation to strongly accept the paper at the conference. 1 is a recommendation to strongly reject the paper at the conference. The y-axis shows the mean score given by an evaluator to the review. So first, let's look at what groups who are not authors did. Roughly, the correlation is flat here. So there's no change in what the review quality was assessed by meta reviewers, reviewers, and external reviewers based on the quality score, based on the review score. But if we look at authors' scores, the green line here, they're clearly showing, giving much higher quality scores to positive reviews on their papers. And we can look at the same set of plots for these sub-criteria. So again, for groups that were not authors, the trend is roughly flat. But on all of these sub-criteria, authors are seem to be positively biased. Now, of course, this is just a correlation. So we also tried to control for potential confounders. We conducted a rigorous analysis by matching pairs of reviews. So in particular, we start with an accept review and a reject review on one paper. And then we ask the author of that paper to evaluate, we look at cases where an author of that paper evaluated both of these reviews. We match these pairs of reviews on a number of criteria. First, they should have similar evaluations of review quality by non-authors. So this controls for differences in review quality between the positive and negative reviews. Second, they should have similar length to try to control for this length bias that I described before. And we found that authors had an 82% chance of rating a positive review on their paper as higher quality than a negative review. So this corresponded to 1.5 points higher on average on our 7-point scale. So quite a significant bias towards positive reviews. In addition to the prior two analyses I described, we assessed the prevalence of a number of known sources of error in review processes. And I won't have time to get into all of the details, but we applied methodology from prior works that look at evaluating peer review quality to allow for direct comparison between errors in paper review processes and errors in this evaluation process we're looking at of evaluating peer review quality. So we looked at inter-evaluator disagreement and generally found that it was of similar magnitude to the level of inter-evaluator disagreement at NeurIPS for paper reviews. We looked at issues of miscalibration and at subjectivity in mapping these sub-criteria scores I described to overall quality scores. And across these types of errors, our quantitative estimates suggest a similar magnitude of error in reviews of reviews as you see in reviews of papers. In conclusion, our findings on sources of bias raise interesting issues in practice. First, the problem of author outcome bias raises questions about the viability of using authors as adjudicators of review quality. I think it's quite tempting to ask authors whether reviews are good or not because they know their papers best of maybe anybody, but they have this clear bias towards positive reviews. So if you don't account for that in any way and just try to use their evaluations, it creates very perverse incentives for reviewers in the process. Second, there's an open question of how to mitigate length bias. And I would caution people in particular who are looking at using LLMs to improve the peer review process in various ways to consider issues of length bias in doing so, because LLMs are very good at producing longer text. But if you deploy an LLM to, let's say, assist reviewers in writing reviews, it may just lengthen the reviews and lead to a perception of higher quality review without substantively better reviews. And finally, a takeaway here is that many of the issues in evaluating paper quality arise in evaluating review quality. So it's not necessarily a cure-all to just say, let's introduce processes to evaluate review quality, because we end up in this meta problem of many of the same types of problems that we know exist in paper review quality popping up in evaluating review quality. Thanks.
We will take questions. I see movement. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm from the University of Sydney. Thanks for this really interesting study. About the uselessness of the elongated reviews, I find as an editor sometimes like, maybe you could elaborate on how you copy pasted this useless text in, because I feel that sometimes it divides up the review into sections, so I can tell, where you copy pasted that text that said, here are some questions I have for the authors. But if that like came under the part where they gave their overall evaluation, that's like useful to me as a editor to like see what's going on, and it sort of parses it out for me. And as a second reason, it might not be useless. Like it actually reassures the reader or the editor or the authors that the reviewer is being conscientious because they're like repeating the instructions. So it's a signal that the reviewer actually followed the instructions, which we can't count on as editors. So I was wondering about your comment about that.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we could interpret these as adding some value. In like the strictest sense, they haven't added any new informational content. So to the extent that there's this incredibly cheap way of having people perceive your reviews as better, I think that's highly problematic for any incentive mechanisms that you try to include for peer review quality, right? Because what we're trying to incentivize, if we put that into place, is more like truly more thoughtful reviews. And this is like a clear short circuit to just do something that takes 2 seconds of effort to get people to perceive your review as higher quality. It's possible that editors and authors were maybe, and reviewers were anchoring to these sorts of heuristics that show, like, as you say, that people are putting in effort. I think the same, like in general, length is viewed as a heuristic for people putting effort into a review. But I think those assumptions are increasingly problematic with, the use of computers to copy paste things at the most basic sense, and with the use of LLMs to make things longer for you.
Thank you. From the internet?
Yes, thank you. 2 related questions. One from Kristen Perry, Melanoma Institute, where reviewers asked to assess the tone of the paper, whether, sentiment analysis of being polite or rude. And Bahar Memani of Elsevier asks similarly, can you see a connection between review quality and paper quality, and tone of review can contribute to the definition of quality if that's not clearly communicated? So first about tone.
So we're not directly asking about tone of the reviews, but there is this sub-criteria question that we asked about constructiveness, which I think is getting at tone in some sense. Generally, like the results for this constructiveness question looked very similar to the results for all of the other questions. I don't know off the top of my head if there was a correlation between the constructiveness question answer and the quality of the paper as assessed by reviewers. That is, whether like more negative reviews were considered less constructive. That would be a good thing to check. Yeah.
And a variation on it is the quality of the paper and the quality of the reviews. Do you have any sense for that?
So that's like kind of what we get at in our author outcome analysis. So if you look at these plots, you can see that for non-author groups, that the y-axis is basically showing the review quality, the quality score given by reviewers, where it's getting higher. So for all groups that aren't the authors, there's no particular correlation between the assessed quality of the paper and the assessed quality of the review. But authors have this bias where they say, if you said my paper was low quality, then I think you get.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, Mark Helfand, Portland, Oregon. It's really good work. Enjoyed it a lot. Looking at the slides you have here about the authors being biased, I can understand that, the argument that it's all bias is that other people don't have it. That's the argument. And I can also see that a positive review, there's a lot of reasons why authors would rate them highly. I think there's maybe more to it or more of a problem with negative reviews. And I guess I just throw this out there in case it can kind of, if you can comment or do more research on it. I don't think negative reviews can be seen in isolation. I think if you're an author and you have 3 negative reviews and they're all saying the same thing, you probably have some serious flaw in your research. Whereas if they're all saying different things and they're saying them in different ways, and one seems, without being rude, seems dismissive. And another says, well, you say to our knowledge, but obviously this isn't new. And a third one says, something about an equation in the paper. There's a really qualitative difference between a group of negative reviews. One of them may stand out as critical, but fair and so on, and others stand out as these other categories, that it's pretty hard to rate, to have the rating unit be single reviews when you're talking about what authors are seeing, or editors for that matter. I wonder if you have any thought on that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess it's hard to get at in our analysis because we're looking at matched pairs of a positive and a negative review on the same paper. So by definition of our group that we're studying, they didn't receive all negative reviews. They received some positive review. I'm not sure in terms of author perception. I don't have a clear prior on whether that would make authors feel better, like about the quality of all of their reviews if they were all negative, or just more unhappy and feel that the whole process was broken and all of their reviews were bad. But I agree, it would be quite interesting to look at like altogether how that affects things. Yeah.
Hi, Tim Miller from Boston Children's Hospital. So a related phenomenon that I see is to complaining about review quality after like the ARR or NeurIPS deadlines is people complaining about their reviews all being LLM generated. And I have a suspicion that that also is susceptible to motivated reasoning, where they think if they don't like the review, it's an LLM maybe, and if they if they like the review, it's a smart human. I'm wondering whether similar methods could be used. The problem there is I think people write off maybe some legitimate critiques because they think it's coming from an LLM and don't improve the paper. I wonder if these techniques could be used to study that, and whether you think, whether you have any intuitions about whether people can accurately detect that.
Yeah, I think it would be quite an interesting study. So we did this study in 2022, which is kind of before widespread adoption of LLMs. I know of some studies in the literature that look at whether people can perceive difference between LLM generated text and human generated text. And often humans are not that good at figuring out what was LLM generated or human generated. I don't know of anything in the context of peer review, but I do think it would be quite relevant because people throw around accusations all the time now of reviews being LLM generated, which may or may not be rooted in anything real, or may be reflective of biases, like they're not liking negative reviews. So I think we could use similar techniques, like of trying to run a sort of RCT at a large scale conference where we manipulate LLM generated or human generated text. I guess the only challenge is ascertaining that we have human generated reviews, which who really knows these days at NeurIPS if a review is purely human generated or not, but yeah.
Since we have a little bit of time, I also have a question, and I apologize if you mentioned that and I missed it. Were the reviews anonymized? Was this an anonymous peer review system, or was it was the identity of the reviewers known?
This is so it depends a little bit on the group here, because generally the area chairs, the editors, know the identity of the reviewers. So to them, it's not anonymous.
Yeah.
But to authors,
To
it's
authors,
anonymous.
it was
They
anonymous.
would not know who the other.
Thank you. There is one more question.
If you have time for one more. Andreas Lund from University of Southern Denmark. You might have said this, but I might have missed it. So just for clarification. So the time frame from when the authors, they got the review and they had to kind of assess the review quality. How long was that? Because I would imagine, like as an author, if you get a reject, you're immediately kind of in shock and you are very curious maybe at the reviewers. But after some time working with the paper and rethinking, you can actually see that some of their suggestions have really improved the paper. I was wondering whether you at what time point did you kind of ask them to rate the quality? Was that immediately after they received the review that gave them?
Yeah, we asked them pretty soon after they had received the reviews. Also, the review process at conferences like this is really pretty quick. Like it only takes maybe 3 months or so end to end from the time you get reviews to a decision. So we asked them in that intermediate period before they had received the decision. It seems possible maybe if you waited longer, they would have more reflection time. I'm not sure if, how that would affect things.
Thank you.